The title of this video is Managing Virtual Machines with Power CLI. This is a part of the VMware vSphere Power CLI training course. In this lesson, we're going to talk about virtual machine commandlets, the most important of which is obviously get VM. If you've seen my other videos, you know why I say that. We're going to go into great depth and have demonstrations and explanation about several topics, the first of which is going to be how to automate the creation of virtual machines. Then we're going to talk about how to manage virtual machine power states. This is just dealing with things like powering them off and on. I'm going to show you how to modify virtual machines, how to work with templates, how to work with snapshots. I'll show you how to perform vMotion and svMotion at the command line. And lastly, I'll show you how to execute Power CLI scripts inside of virtual machines. There are over 25 commandlets available for working with virtual machines. Now, unlike some of the other ones that we talked about in the host server video, many of those have VM host in the title, so it was kind of easier to group them. With these, there are a lot of different nouns related to virtual machines, and it's not as easy to group them all. You can see here I've got a lot of them that start with VM, but there are some that don't start with VM. They don't have the letters VM in them at all. So, and I'll show you examples of some of these as I go. But just for example, we have VM, VM guest file, guest network interface, guest route, VM question. So that'll let you actually answer a question if you've got one open, if you've migrated a virtual machine or something like that. Anyway, there's a lot of them, and I'll show you plenty of examples in this lesson. The most important when working with virtual machines is going to be the get VM commandlet. This is how you display information about your virtual machines. And it's going to return a virtual machine object, not just text. So don't forget, in PowerShell, everything's an object, so you can change the way they're formatted and filter them and so on and so forth. So you could, I'll show you some examples here in a minute. There are no required parameters when working with this, so you can just type get-vm and hit enter, and you'll quickly have a list of your virtual machines. There are several optional parameters, such as data store, distributed switch, location, and name. So these are used in this case as filters for narrowing down what you want to see. So you can say, for example, only view the virtual machines which are on a given data store, or connected to a certain distributed switch, or are in a certain folder, or have a name which matches a pattern. Before we get into automating the creation of virtual machines, let me go to a console and show you how to work with get VM real quick. Okay, I've already made my connection using Connect VI Server, so I'm not going to do that again. You can see at the top of the console window where it says connected, and this is my vCenter. So let's just type in get VM host and get VM. Okay, you can see I've got several. And I want to show you how one of the ways that you can filter get VM. Don't forget this GPM script. This doesn't come with Windows PowerShell. This is something that I've programmed myself and made available on the internet. Now, get VM has a couple different modes here. You can either filter by some of these parameters here, or you can filter by distributed switch. And one of the ways that you can filter is by location. And guess what? A VM host is a container. It's a type of container that a virtual machine can reside in. So that's why I showed you my list of VM hosts. What I could do here is get VM host, and I'll just type in the name of one of mine. Okay, type that to get VM. Now, instead of showing you the full list, scrolling up here, instead of seeing this full list of virtual machines, I'm only seeing a subset of them. I'm only seeing the ones that are actually physically right now on this virtual machine host. So this is equivalent in the vSphere client to, let me see, go to Home, Hosts and Clusters, click on one of my virtual machines. I'll click on the second one here. Click on the Virtual Machines tab, and you can see that list here is the same. So that's the equivalent of what we've done. Let's do a different example. Get data store. Okay, and the way that I name these is local is going to be direct attached storage, and in this case, OpenFiler is my SAN equivalent. Let's do get data store OpenFiler 1, and then do a get VM. Now I can see, in this case, the single shared data store that I've got in my environment, it's got one virtual machine on it. So you can see how there's ways of filtering out this information. So let's look at a virtual machine. Let's say VM equals get-VM. Now I have a variable in PowerShell, and I can go over some of the information here. Before I do that, let's do $VM.length. Now that's a quick way to get the count of any object in PowerShell. Every single object is going to have a length property. Now let's examine the output here. We've got name, and that's pretty self-explanatory. Power state, this is going to be either powered on or powered off. Num CPUs, that's how many virtual CPUs my virtual machines have been assigned. And then the same with memory MB, that's how many megabytes of RAM. Now this is my lab, so many of these are not real virtual machines. They don't run any workloads, so the amount of memory is nominal here. I'm going to index into my VM array. I'm going to just check out the first one. Okay, it's called batch. Pipe this to format list, and let's see what I see. As you can see, there's more information than just these 1, 2, 3, 4 properties. I've got several properties in addition. So I've got a hard disks property, CD drives, floppy drives, network adapters, USB devices, and then host, and then ID and notes. Some of the more important ones are going to be hard disks and maybe CD drives occasionally, and network adapters. There are commandlets for working with these individually, which are very flexible and useful. And I'm going to show you demonstrations of working with these types of virtual hardware a little bit later on in this same lesson. So I'm not going to talk more about them right now. But real briefly, you can see that I've got the name of a hard disk here, the name of a CD drive, virtual CD drive here, name of a network adapter. And trust me when I say there's more information in there. That's not just a name, that is an object representing this network adapter. Let's go back to our slides. Okay, let's get into automating the creation of virtual machines. If you've been doing anything with VMware, I'm sure that you've created many of these things. There's a wizard under the File menu, or you can get to it from the context menu of many different items in the vSphere client. And you can go through that and create a virtual machine. It doesn't take that long. But of course, if you're going to be creating more than one, then it's going to quickly get tedious. So having the ability to automate the creation of virtual machines is very powerful. There is one commandlet in particular that we're going to be looking at now. It's called new-vm. And it's a pretty meaty one. It's got a lot of stuff in it. In fact, it has 4 different modes. We have a mode to create a new virtual machine, clone an existing virtual machine, create a new VM from a template, and then register an existing VM from a VMX file. So the first 3, I think, are relatively straightforward. This last one I'll explain a little bit more. So the VMX file it's a file that's going to sit on your storage, your data store, and it contains a lot of the settings related to a virtual machine. It's got the name of the virtual machine and information about the hardware, just everything. It's all in that one file. When you remove a virtual machine from vCenter, you can optionally leave it on disk, and then you have what is basically a virtual machine that's not accessible from anywhere. So if you wanted to add that back in, you can register it using the new VM commandlet. And there's several use cases where that would come in handy. Some of the common parameters with this commandlet are name, memory MB, disk MB, VM host, data store, and network name. So name obviously is just going to be the name of the virtual machine. That's just plain text. Memory MB is going to be an integer, and that's going to be related to how much RAM you've got in this virtual machine. Disk MB, similarly, it's going to be the number of megabytes, but we're talking about disk storage instead of RAM. VM host is going to be the location where you're placing this virtual machine workload. Data store is where you're going to basically place these virtual machine files, the VMX file and the disk files and everything else related to a virtual machine. And then network name, especially if you've got multiple networks, you're going to need to specify which one your virtual machine is going to be connected. Let's get straight into it and create a new virtual machine. Okay, let us look at the help for new-vm. And as I said, it's got multiple modes with a lot of different parameters. Just want to show you that real quick. One thing really cool about the PowerShell help system is you frequently got examples that you can refer to. This commandlet is no exception, and you can see here several examples of working with this, and rather than just point to them on the screen, that wouldn't be much of a demonstration. I'm going to go ahead and do several of these. Let's clear the screen real quick. Let's say new-vm, and that scrolled a whole lot of information. Okay, so I've scrolled up here. You can see there's a whole lot of different parameters here. I only gave you about a quarter of them, and there's just a whole lot of stuff to do, and I'm going to give you some examples for working with many of these parameters, but not every single one. Well, let's go ahead and do new-vm, name, test VM, memory megabytes 4, disk megabytes 4, and let's just do that, see what happens. Mandatory parameter VM host. So let's do that. Okay, so I gave it the name of one of my virtual machine hosts, and let's bring up, okay, there's my progress window. You can see create, okay, and it's done. So what I've shown to you is the absolute minimum set of information required to create a new virtual machine. As you can see, that's actually quite a bit faster than doing the same thing using the vSphere client. Let's go through that real quick so I can show you what's missing and what you might expect to be there that's not there. As you can see, the virtual machine was created, and let's see. Under virtual machines here, we have our test VM. Let's do new virtual machine wizard here. We're just going to go through some of the steps here so I can point out what's different, what you might be missing. One thing that we've not done is we didn't designate an inventory location. So basically some defaults are being accepted when you use just the bare minimums as I showed you. We also didn't select which data store. So the way that this works is the VM host, if you've got multiple data stores, there's a way to ask the server which ones it has available. And the first one that comes back, that's going to be where your virtual machine goes. So many cases, 99% of the time, you're going to want to explicitly specify the data store location. Otherwise, there's no telling where it's going to go. It might go to, in this case, you can see this is a local hard drive. That's going to preclude you from doing vMotion because that local disk isn't going to be accessible from your other ESX servers. So you're going to want to specify a data store most of the time. I didn't have to specify the virtual machine hardware version. Didn't specify anything about the guest OS. And I didn't specify a number of processors. We did do memory. And we didn't specify anything about the networking. And here's the SCSI controller. New virtual disk. I did do that in this case. I said that I wanted a 4 megabyte disk, but I didn't specify any of these disk settings. And yeah, that's silly. Let's just change that to megabyte. That'll let me continue. And here's some more options on the virtual disk. What I did in this one line of PowerShell achieved most of what happened through that wizard, but it was much quicker. And there are a lot of more options that you can manipulate. You can change these out. You can manipulate these. Let me scroll up a little bit and look and see what other options we have on this default parameter set. So I could say that I wanted to have this go into a certain location. So that's going to be how you're going to change the inventory location. So let's do that. We'll play with that a little bit. So I have several folders here. I'm just going to say folder 2. Now, if I do the same new VM command that I did before, we'll give it a unique name, test VM2, and let's say location, and we'll call the location $F, because that's what I did here, was I assigned this folder 2 to the $F variable. So now if I create that, and actually I'm going to use run async we used in a previous lesson, that's going to give me a task job right away. Go to vSphere client, and you can see that that did create now. And instead of sending it to the basement, it sent it to folder 2. So let's change our mode from hosts and clusters to VMs and templates. And you can see where my first VM showed up. It's right here under test VM. If I expand out my folder 2, and now you can see test VM2, and that's how you can assign a location to a new virtual machine. Okay, now we're going to, from creating a new virtual machine, go straight to cloning an existing virtual machine. I'm going to go back to my console. Okay, so let's figure out how to clone an existing virtual machine. First, let's get a list of our virtual machines. Let's say that I want to clone my box that's called production 1. So let's say get VM production 1, assign that to a variable. We'll call it $VM. Now, if we look at the mode for, let's see, new VM, we have register, we have template, we have clone VM. And notice that the VM parameter is on the pipeline. You can specify it on the pipeline. So what that means is I can take this VM and pipe it to new VM. And right away I'm over halfway done. Let's give it a new name of which one is this? This is production 1. So we can call it production 02. How about that? And I'm going to just hit enter and we'll see if it prompts me. Yes, it does say that I have to give it a virtual machine host. And there we go. It is underway and mostly done. So while that goes, let's go to the vSphere client, have a look and see. You can see here that the clone operation is underway. And it's always nice to kind of be able to go back and forth and see, okay, what did I just do? Yes, it's doing in the client exactly what I thought it was going to do. And now my operation is complete. Go back to my console window. You can see that it has given me a virtual machine object back. And there's that new name. So that's all there is to cloning. It's really not a whole lot to it. If you don't want to make any changes to the new virtual machine, then it's going to go ahead and do that right away. It's very quick, but you can optionally change some settings and specify some additional details. Maybe I wanted to put in a description, so I could do that. Let's do the same operation. New clone, call it production 03, and say this is the new prod VM created on, and let's see, I'm going to get fancy here, $. Okay, so what I did in PowerShell, this is called a sub-expression, where we have a $, and then an open and a closed parenthesis. And then inside those parentheses, you can put most anything. So I'm just going to do get date, and let's see what that does. Actually, I'm going to do run async and hit enter. Okay, so it went ahead and created that clone VM task. Go check on it in the vSphere client. We've got our clone of Production 01 is underway. If I click on Production 03, the brand new one that we are in the middle of creating right now, you'll see that everything's grayed out, and it just completed. So I'm going to go get access to everything. Scroll down a little bit. This is the prod VM created on, and there's my time and date. So that was pretty handy. So that's a way to take an existing virtual machine and clone it, and optionally change a couple things or add a couple of details as you go. Okay, we're going to go from cloning to registering a virtual machine. So let's start with the vSphere client. Okay, as I mentioned, when you've got a virtual machine which doesn't exist in your system and you wanted to be able to bring it back in, that's called registering. So I'm going to unregister a virtual machine so that we can then register it and go through that exercise. First, I'm going to note this new VM we just created, Production 03. It's located on this data store right here, local DS 10.0031. And don't ask me what 10.0031 is. That must have been an old IP scheme that I was using previously. Anyway, let's go ahead and remove it. Now, I'm not going to delete from disk. I'm going to just perform the remove from inventory. And that way it will remain. And you can see the action there in vCenter. It's calling this task an unregister. So now it might make perfect sense for you why I keep calling it register to bring it back in. It's opposite of unregister, of course. So Production 3 is gone. Now let's go to our console window. Okay, get VM productions asterisk. And I see just my 1 and my 2. Now in order to register a virtual machine, let's look back at the new-vm commandlet. Here's the parameter set we're working with. The most important for this particular mode is the VM file path. Let's examine the help file for new-vm and see what it has to say about this. We're going to go page down until we see the VM file path. I see location, data store, VApp, disk MB, disk storage format, lots of interesting things, not the one that I'm looking for. HA, DRS, VM swap file policy, and it's got to be the one at the bottom, doesn't it? OS customization spec, there we go. VM file path. So specify a path to the virtual machine you want to register. This is not giving me any hints as to what this thing needs to look like. And I already know the answer to this question, but I'm showing you how to find the answer, because I want to definitely teach you how to learn how to do this. Okay, so there's the example I was looking for. In this example, they're starting off by changing directory to a certain location, which is basically browsing one of your data stores and grabbing a VMX file and then using that VMX file path and giving it to register. So let's do that. We're going to start off here with VM stores. Let's explain where this comes from. Get PS drive. When you perform a connect VI server, one of the things that happens after it creates that connection is it creates a couple of PS drives. And you can see them here. They're Vim something, Vim inventory and Vim data store. And you can see the difference here is one is the last connected server and the other one is all connected servers. So inventory is basically a browsable list of what is in your inventory. They could be folders, virtual machines, hosts, everything that is in the tree view of your vSphere client as part of your inventory. Data store is basically just dealing with your data stores. So we're going to be able to view the files in the data store. So let's change to this as if it were a drive, which is exactly how PowerShell sees it. So I just type VM stores : hit enter. Oops, let's try that again with the CD. Okay, now you can see now that I've got the name of my virtual center server is right there with an @ followed by a port number. And I'm just going to descend into this. You can see now I've got the name of my basement. do a directory again. Now we're getting somewhere. These are the names of my data stores. And you may recall that this is the data store in particular where I expect to find my production 03 VMX file. And there it is, CD production 03. Now we are getting somewhere. So let's do a dir star.vmx. That returns one file. I'm going to take that and assign it to a variable. So we'll just say f equals. Now I'm going to pipe this to format list. And we've got lots of details here, the most important of which is the data store full path. So note the format of this. We have the name of the data store in square brackets, followed by space, followed by the path, and this is definitely using the Linux or Unix style forward slash, followed by the name of the VMX file. This is exactly what the new VM commandlet needs. Instead of having to guess and to think about where the data store is and so on and so forth, this is why I'm showing you how to get this information so that you'll know how to get it later. So I've got this F object, and it's got the data store full path property that I need to re-register this virtual machine. So let's do new-vm, and I don't have to be C in this location where I can go back to my C drive if I want to. In fact, let's clear the screen. Okay, now I still have F data store full path. That's the information that I need. In fact, we'll just call that VMX equals. So if you can see what I did, I basically just took the string, which was part of this property, and assigned it to a whole new object, a variable in PowerShell. So that's going to make it even easier to deal with. Let's say new-vm and vm file path, VMX, and I believe VM host is still required, so let's do that. That should be most of it right there. Now, you do have to make sure that the VMX file and the data store in question is accessible to the VM host. Otherwise, you're going to get an error message. Let's look at our console. Note that it says reconfigure and register. And now it's done, and there is our virtual machine, which had previously been unregistered. Now it is registered. Managing virtual machine power states. We've got several actions that you can take with a virtual machine. You can start, stop, suspend, and restart them. And I'm going to show you how to do those using PowerCLI. First, I want to note that in order to perform a graceful shutdown, don't forget you've got to have a VM tools service that's in a running state. There's several commands we're going to be looking at here. Start-VM, that allows you to start a virtual machine. Stop VM will let you stop a virtual machine. And note that it's equivalent to pulling the plug. And it's got an extra parameter that you can use to kill a stuck or a hung virtual machine. That comes in handy in some emergency cases. And you've got suspend VM, which will take the current working state of that virtual machine and write it to disk and shut it off. Then restart VM will power cycle a virtual machine. Don't forget the run async parameter. This one's going to be helpful when I show you some demonstrations here in a minute. If you want to make changes to a lot of virtual machines, you don't want to sit there and wait for it if you're doing it at your console. Now, we have several VM guest power commandlets. They're related to the others, but subtle difference. The VMware Tools service must be healthy for these to work. So here's a screenshot from my vSphere client showing the VMware Tools, and it says OK. If your VMware Tools are not OK, now they can be out of date, that's okay. But if they're not running, then you're not going to be able to access the guest, and you're not going to be able to shut things down. So the first command here, restart VM guest, this will gracefully restart a guest operating system. Now, shutdown VM guest will allow you to gracefully shut down that guest operating system. And the suspend VM guest we'll put the guest operating system into sleep mode before it performs the suspend operation. Let's get straight to the demonstrations. First, we're going to reboot a mess of virtual machines. Let's do that. Okay, I've got my console up. Okay, now I've got these VMs that start with productions. Let's get VM prod. Now, if I wanted to pull the plug on these things, I could do that just with a stop VM. I'm going to answer A, yes to all. One of them was off, so that's why I got the error message. Okay, so now they're all off. Let's do the get VM again. Now, you can see they're all off. Let's pipe that to start VM. And I'm going to use the run async parameter, which I mentioned earlier. And it spit out those task objects. Let's get task. And you can see here, power on VM, and I'll say running. And notice the power off VM, one of them was successful, two of them had errors, and these are the two that were already off. So of course you can't turn it off twice. Let's run get task again, and now it's a success for everything. Let's pull up our vSphere client. You should see here at the bottom in the task pane. Let's scroll that up a little bit. Okay, so we've got power on, production 1, production 3, and production 2. So let's go through the rest of them and do our get VM prod star. They're all on. Let's do a restart VM. And again, we've got the confirmation pop. I'm going to say A for yes to all. Okay, so it's that quick. Now we've got some other ones here that were, let's see. So I'll show you in a moment how we can kill a stuck VM. Let's take that update me. It's currently on. Let's pipe to stop VM. Dash kill. I got an error message. The requested operation is only supported when connected directly to an ESX host. And the reasons for this is related to the application programming interfaces for working with, and in this case, killing a virtual machine with extreme prejudice. Now I've got another window here that is directly connected. So let's do our get VM update me. Okay, so there it is. Let's pipe that to stop VM minus kill. Hit enter. Are you sure? Yes. So when you do this, it's going to do a slightly different operation, and for the purposes of stopping a virtual machine, it's the same as running it without kill. In this case, this virtual machine, there's nothing wrong with it, but you may have seen some cases where you've got a list of virtual machines and one is neither on nor off. And I don't have one handy that is stuck that I can show to you, but basically what you see when you click on the virtual machine, you'll see that everything is grayed out. You can't power it on, you can't power it off, and it is stuck. So that is the case where you can log into the vSphere client directly to an ESX server, and you can usually do some operations there. You also have the option to do some things with the logging in and running a VMware support binary. Okay, let's get back to the slides. Okay, now we're going to talk about how to modify virtual machines. Got a screenshot here of where you would go to edit a virtual machine setting, and you can see there's a lot of things you can do to a virtual machine. I'm going to show you how to do that using PowerCLI using the set VM commandlet. This commandlet has 3 modes. It allows you to modify virtual machine settings, virtual snapshot, and convert a virtual machine to a template. Some of these things you can edit while a virtual machine is on. Some you have to have it powered off in order to make the settings change. The things that you can do from PowerCLI, as far as whether a machine is off or on, it's the exact same as when you are connected to a vSphere client. So you don't get any shortcuts by doing it through PowerCLI. You have to obey the same rules. Some of the important parameters: VM stands for virtual machine, obviously, memory MB, and num CPU. And I'll show you how some of these things work here in a moment. In fact, let's go ahead and open up a console window and play around with modifying memory and CPU settings. Okay, I've got my console window. Before I do that, let's take a step into the vSphere client, have a look at some of the things that will be changing. Under Edit Settings, we've got Memory and CPU. Now this virtual machine is powered on, so you can see everything is grayed out in this case. However, if I go to Network Adapter, there are several things that I can change. So the same thing is going to apply when we do it from PowerCLI. Let's look at VM, which is powered off. Okay, let's go to Edit Settings. You can see here that the slider and the boxes here for editing are available because this VM is off. Now there are cases where you can edit memory and CPU with the box on. You've got to have a certain guest operating system, and there's a flag that can be set on the virtual machine advanced settings, which will allow you to do memory hot adds and CPU hot adds, which is kind of cool. I've done that in production before. But let's go ahead and work with some of these virtual machines. Start out with a list of them. Okay. So let's do VM equals get-vm app, some of the powered off ones. And let's look at it. It has 1 CPU and 4 megs of memory. So let's check out set-vm. And we can see here that it's got several parameters. One of the ones we'll touch on here in a moment are memory MB and num CPU. But I wanted to show you some of the other pieces here. Version, if you need to change the version of the virtual machine hardware, you can do that. OS customization spec, this is useful if you want to use the facility that will customize the virtual machine and join it to your Windows domain, give it a certain serial number and so forth. There's some things to do with that. There's some HA and DRS settings here that you can change, such as the DRS automation level. So you can say that you want to have a certain virtual machine treated specially so that perhaps it is either more or less resistant to moving around based on the resources available in your environment. And then you could change the VM swap file policy and description. Let's just start here with VM. Type that to set-vm. Memory MB 8 and num CPU 2. Description. This is me. And if I hit enter, this is a change that you need to confirm, so we will hit enter again. Invalid VM processor count. Now, it said this because I probably don't have a guest operating system specified for this VM because it's just a lab VM. I can go check that out here in a moment. Just want to make sure that this got started. So, if we look at the app VM, a lot of my virtual machines in the lab aren't real VMs, they don't do anything. XP Professional 32-bit, of course that version of the operating system only allows 1 CPU, and VMware knows this, so therefore that's why we got that error message that you saw. But that's all there is to it. If you want to do this to multiple machines, you could definitely do that. Let's do something else here. Let's say get VM. I want to get all virtual machines that are off. I'm going to use something called the where object commandlet. I have to type it. And I'm going to say, look at the power state of every virtual machine. And if it is equal to powered off, let's test that one. I do, in fact, get everything that's powered off. So let's pipe that to set VM. And I'm just going to do a minor change. We'll do description. And today is... Actually, that's not going to work. I have to have double quotes. I'm going to say A, yes, to all. And that's one of the great features about PowerShell is the pipeline. So running get VM, piping it to where object and giving it a filter. And what's going to happen is it's going to give me several virtual machines. It's going to run each one of them through that set VM command. Now this is going to be a nice segue into a demonstration that we'll get into shortly. One of these spit out an error message. This VM has questions that must be answered before this operation can continue. So we had one of those attempts to change the description field actually failed. Look in the vSphere client, page down here a little bit. So there we have the new description that I placed there. Okay, now we're going to look at the hard disk commandlets. And as I warned you up front, there were several properties in a virtual machine which you can use to manipulate some information related to the hard drive, the network adapter, and so forth. We're going to look at these now, these extra commandlets. First one here I'm going to talk about is get hard disk. This is how you can retrieve information about VM disks, and I'll show you how that works in just a minute. Copy hard disk will let you copy a VM disk to a new data store. You can optionally change the storage format. You could go from thin to thick during a copy. This storage format, this is basically whether or not say that you got a 20 gigabyte virtual machine disk. If it is thin, then what's going to happen is it's not going to take up 20 gigs on disk. It's only going to take up the amount of data that's actually in use. However, a thick virtual machine disk file is going to be exactly the same size as its nominal size. So a 20 gig VM disk would take up 20 gigs on your data store. New hard disk commandlet is going to create a new virtual machine disk. Remove hard disk is going to unassign a disk from a VM, so it's going to still remain on that data store, but there is an option to delete the disk from the data store at the same time. There's another one called set hard disk, and this allows you to resize a virtual machine disk. You can also change its persistence type. The options here are persistent, independent persistent, and independent non-persistent. There are a few other types, but they are not supported in the latest version of vSphere, so I'm not going to mention them here. The disk persistence type, this is related to whether or not your disk is affected by snapshots. If it's independent, then it is not affected by a snapshot. And whether it is persistent or non-persistent, basically is whether changes are kept to the disk. So if you were to power cycle a VM that has non-persistence on its disk type, then any changes that were made before that power cycle, they're going to be lost. So there's some instances where that might come in handy, and you can modify that setting using the set hard disk commandlet. You can also use it to expand a disk, similar to how you could use the copy hard disk commandlet. You can use set hard disk to change this setting in place, as it were, and you can move a disk to a new data store. There is an additional capability to resize a guest disk partition. So say, for example, that you've got a Windows virtual machine and it has a 20 gigabyte hard disk, and you thought about it and you realized, okay, wow, that's really smaller than I need. I'm going to make it 50. So you can use the set hard disk commandlet to change the size of that from 20 to 50 gigabytes. But you're still going to have to go into the Windows operating system and modify, either create a new partition or extend the partition or what have you. Well, there's actually some experimental capability that will let you make that change right on the fly. And you just have to give it some additional credentials for that guest operating system. And there's some magic that can be done there. Lastly, the capacity. I want to mention that it's specified in kilobytes with this commandlet. PowerShell's got some helpers called some numeric constants going from KB to MB to GB to TB, corresponds obviously to megabyte, gigabyte, terabyte, and so on. So you don't have to remember, how many kilobytes are in a gigabyte, and so forth. It makes the math a little bit easier. So let me show you how we can add a hard disk to a virtual machine. Okay, I've got my console up. Let's find a willing and able virtual machine. Let's work with this web VM. Now I'm going to pipe this to get hard disk. You can see that I've got a single hard disk in this virtual machine, and it is persistent. And here is the VM file path to the disk. Similarly to the VMX file path that we were looking at earlier, this is going to have the data store name and then square brackets around that, followed by space, and then the path to the VMDK file. And the capacity of this one is 10,240 kilobytes. So let's look at, there's a little more detail that is in here. So we'll pipe this to format list, aliased to FL. Now we can learn that the storage format of this disk is thick, so that means that it's going to take up this amount of kilobytes on disk, whether or not there's data taking up every single sector in that disk. So that's basically all there is to it in here. There's a couple of things, but for the most part they're just identification sort of things. What we can do with this, we can add a new hard disk, and we can also change some settings of an existing hard disk. So let's do that. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to assign this to VM so I will not forget. And let's see, first we'll do, oh, okay, it's actually new. We've got two different modes for this. You can either create a new hard disk or you can use an existing hard disk. And if you've got the disk path to that VMDK file, you could use this mode to do that. So some of the settings we've got here are persistence, controller, disk type, capacity, and kilobytes, split, thin provisioned, and storage format, device name, data store, and so on. Let's keep it simple. I want to just kind of see what is the bare minimum that I can do to add a new hard disk. And let's see, capacity I'm certain is going to be required. So let's start there, capacity KB, and I'm just going to say just a number. Okay, so what it did was it created a new virtual machine disk, and note we've got the data store 10.030, down here 10.030. So it created it in the same data store. So if you don't specify a data store, that's what's going to happen. You're going to get a new VM disk file like this one. It's going to be in that same location. So there are some other settings here. I could say I could change the disk type. Let's do another disk. Disk type foo. Hit enter, and it's going to tell me exactly what I need to know, which is the different modes. I've got raw virtual, raw physical, flat, and unknown. I'm going to create an RDM disk. That's frequently done for databases, and there's some other reasons you would want to do those. You could specify the type here that would allow you to do that. So raw physical. Let's see, we've also got thin provisioned, which is a Boolean. Let's do that real quick. Now we got a warning from the PowerCLI which says, thin provision parameter is obsolete, use storage format instead. So let's see what storage format does. It went ahead and did it though, so that was awfully kind of it. Now this is telling me the different options here: thin 2 GB, thick 2 GB, and thin. So if I wanted to do thin, there, now I've created a new thin disk. Now we've done this about 3 or 4 times. Let's go look at this web VM and see what its virtual machine settings look like. Okay, click on Edit Settings. Sure enough, it's got a lot of hard drives. You can see here some of the settings. And there's really not a lot to it in this case. Now, obviously, you could do this to multiple virtual machines. I could easily add a hard drive to every virtual machine in my environment by simply replacing VM with get VM. So if I hit enter here, I'm going to add a new, in this case, a tiny little hard drive. It's going to do that for every virtual machine in my environment. Let's go ahead and watch this go in the Virtual Center client. And there it goes. You can see these are spinning up in progress, completed, 100%. So this is a pretty quick operation, especially if it's a small disk, as it is in my case. But even big disks on VMFS are provisioned really quickly. So this 92% number, it's actually taking the count of all the virtual machine objects that were going through the pipeline, and it divides them out accordingly. So say that if I had 12 virtual machines, well, it's going to say I've got 9 of the 12 done, or whatever the math here is, to come up with a 92% complete. So it's still waiting on a couple of those to complete. So that's the way to create a new hard drive. In a moment, we'll work on how to modify one. Let's move on to the network adapter commandlets. We have get network adapter. This retrieves information about a VM network adapter. New is to create a new one. Remove is to get rid of one. And then set is used to do several things. One of them is to change the assigned network name or distributed virtual switch for a VM network adapter. So effectively changing which network to which a virtual machine is attached. You can also use it to enable or disable a VM network adapter. And you can also change the virtual machine network interface card type. And these options are E1000, Flexible, VMXNet, Enhanced VMXNet, and VMXNet 3. Let me show you how these things work. So I have my console up here. Let's do a get VM. We'll work with the production VMs again. VM equals. Now I have those 3. And let's work with the get network adapter commandlet. Okay, so what we know from this output is that each virtual machine has one and only one network adapter, and they're connected to a certain VM network, and it's called VM network, and they're using a flexible NIC driver, and here are their MAC addresses, and Wake on LAN is not enabled. N equals, and so I'm assigning those virtual network cards to a variable. I'm going to look at the first one and pipe it to format list. And we do have a little more information. Now the one that I wanted to look at in particular was connection state. Connected equals true. Let me show you what this is equal to in the vSphere client. Okay, let's click on production 02. And we'll go to edit settings. Click on network adapter 1. You can see some checkboxes right here on the top right. Connected, and then connected power on. This one here, the connected box, and you can see that it has a checkbox in it right now. That is exactly what we're talking about. Now, I've seen several circumstances that can lead to a virtual machine's network adapter checkbox going unchecked. So basically, removing the network cable or disabling a network card. Obviously, you want your virtual machines to have networking, so it's very important to be sure that you don't run into a situation like this. So let's go back over here. We can see this one's connected as true. We'll do $n0.connection state. So what has happened is I have delved one level deeper, if you will, into this network adapter object. So the network adapter object has a property called connection state, and the connection state property, in fact, has more information underneath it. One of them is that connection state, but another one is whether or not the NIC is going to start connected, whether the guest is allowed to control it. Let's say connected is true. Now we've gotten to the deepest level here, and when we work with the set network adapter commandlet, which I'll show you here momentarily, you can affect changes to this property. So let's go back to our V. Okay, so these are the virtual machines, and then we have N. These are the network adapters. Let's have a look at set VM host, set network adapter. Changes the configuration of the virtual network adapter, and I've explained some of these different properties that you can work with. So let's do set network adapter. The network adapter parameter accepts the network adapter object. And don't forget, we've got these two square braces. That means you can send it multiple items, and we can even send them on the pipeline, so that's great. Other parameters here, MAC address. You can alter the MAC address of a network adapter card. Network name, start connected, connected, wake on LAN, type, and port key, and distributed switch. So what I want to do here is show you how to enable a disabled network adapter. So first, let's go here and go to production 2, network adapter, and this is the box I showed you a minute ago. We're going to disconnect that one. Okay, so that change is completed. Now I'm going to go back to my PowerShell console. Let's go to VM, and I've changed the state, so I need to grab these again. Get network adapter, we'll assign that to N again. And let's take a look at it. Okay, notice that this one says connection state connected false. Now if we look at N1, it's connected true, 2, also connected true. So let's pretend that we don't know which are disconnected. What has happened is, I had some sort of change that I was making on my network, and it has flipped a random number of network cards to the off position, and I don't know how many are off. All I know is that I've got to flip them all back on. So the way that I would do this is take this in, and we'll just do it in one string. Get VM prod star, pipe that to get network adapter, pipe that to set network adapter, and there's a connected flag. I'm just going to set it to true. And I'm going to say A, so it'll do it to all of them. And this change is pretty quick. Now, let's do this again. I'm just going to do get network adapter, and for each object, and let's do connection state. Now they all say true. True, true, true. So that's how you can use the set network adapter commandlet to enable multiple virtual network cards. Now we're going to go right back into the console because I want to show you how to change a VM network assignment. Okay, so these prod VMs are all set to the VM network name. And tell you what, let's go look out at our vSphere client, examine the networking infrastructure here. If I look at, let's see, my second VM host, go to configuration, and then networking, you can see here that we've got a VM network, and I've got my VMs in that. So I've got one called Virtual Machine Network and Virtual Machine Network 2. So I could easily use those for as an example. The question might be, how would I programmatically know which ones are which? So I have a get virtual port group. Let's see, this is going to list it all, but it does sort of answer the question. So I've got VM network is here, and Virtual Machine Network and Virtual Machine Network 2. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this network name to the clipboard, and we'll just say name equals Virtual Machine Network. Okay, now, and so let's look back at the set network adapter, and one of its parameters is network name, and it accepts a string. So what we're going to do is going to take N, pipe that to set network adapter, and access the network name parameter, and just give it the new name like that. I'm going to say A for all, and you can see right here the difference in this network name column. If I scroll up a little bit, it used to say VM network, and now they all say virtual M with a few dots there. So let me go to one of these virtual machines and verify that this setting has changed. You can see there it is right there. Virtual Machine Network. When you're working with standard virtual switches as opposed to distributed virtual switches, there isn't a great way to change the network of multiple virtual machines without doing what I just did. So this is a great shortcut. As you can imagine, going through the vSphere client, clicking on a virtual machine, clicking on Edit Settings, and then clicking on the network adapter, and then going here to the drop-down list and choosing my different switch name or my port group name. Very tedious. It's error prone. So this is a great tip, a great shortcut that it's really not a whole lot of steps. You just need to know the network adapter name and then using set network adapter for that parameter right there. And that's it. And as you saw, it was a very quick change to make. Let's go back to the slides. Now we're going to move on to working with CD drives. Talking about the virtual CD drive, which you can provide to your virtual machines. First command that we're going to talk about is get CD drive. You just type this and hit enter, and you're going to get information about virtual CD drives. You do have to provide a virtual machine object for it to work with, or a name. And I'll show you how all these work here in a moment. New CD drive, you can use this to create a new virtual CD drive. Remove CD drive, obviously, is to get rid of one. And set CD drive, you can use to modify the CD backing. Now, by CD backing, I mean one of the several options in the vCenter client where you can say that you want to have a drive mapped to a physical CD drive in the ESX server, or an ISO file, or the client device. You can also use this command to enable or disable a virtual CD drive, and you can use it to remove the CD media. And this is important when you want to be sure that you can vMotion a virtual machine. You may know that if you leave a CD drive attached with media mapped to it, then vMotion will fail. So let's get straight into demonstration, and I'll show you how these work. Okay, I've got my console up. Let's see what we have to work with here. Get, new, remove, set. First, let me just let's have a look at our VMs. I'm going to use app. So let's get VM app. Pipe that to get CD drive. Pipe that to format list. Make it a little more pleasing to the eye. And as you can see here, the ISO path property is empty, but the host device property is occupied. In this case, this is going to be the CD drive in my ESX server. You might also see /dev/SDB, something like that. That could also be a familiar looking device entry for a physical drive. And some other interesting things here. Connection state, connected equals false. This is, in some ways, it looks similar to the network device that we looked at. It had a connection state property as well. So let's do this. We're going to take this CD drive and assign it to a variable, cd.connectionState, hit enter. And you can see it looks exactly the same as the network adapter connection state property. You've got the connected, start connected, and allow guest control properties there beneath it. Okay, so let's say that you've got a list of virtual machines. You want to audit them to make sure that you'll have a successful vMotion. You don't have any virtual machines which have attached CD devices. So we're going to need to look at this connection state property, and there's a couple other things that we're going to look at, and I'll show you how to go through that. First, let's say VM equals get VM, and then CD equals VM, pipe that to get CD drive. That takes about a second for each virtual machine, perhaps, maybe a little bit less. Okay, so let's have a look at it. We've got 10 of those, and this is what it looks like. And it's not extremely useful in this form. What we can see here just right off the bat, I've got 2 virtual machines with ISOs mapped, and then 1 with a host device. So those have all got to go. They won't necessarily be in the way if they're disconnected, but we definitely want to go through and check them. Okay, what I can do is use the group object commandlet. I'm going to try this a couple different ways here. CD, pipe that to group object, and then I'm going to group it on the property connection state. In this case, it says connected equals false. So actually, I might be in good shape. Let's go check out some of these virtual machines to see why it says connected false. And I can flip those around and show you what it would look like if they were on. So I can go to the app VM, which is one that I know has one of those CD devices mapped. This is the one with the physical host device. So in this case, it is not connected, and connect is grayed out. So that one's not going to be a problem. The virtual machine isn't on anyway. Let's look at one that is on, and I will make sure that it is in the connected state so that it would definitely have that problem. Let's set this one to host device and connected. I'll do the same for production 3. And I'll show you how to do this similar thing here with PowerShell in a moment. But I definitely want to show you the before and after. Connected. Okay. So now I've got 2, which should definitely fail. So let's run these operations which we did a moment ago again. So VM equals get VM, and then pipe that to CD. And let's look at this. The layout looks a little bit different now. Now let's do that group object and see what that says. Okay, now we've got 2 that say connected true. Do you understand here what group object is doing? It's basically looking at a single property. It looks at all the possible varieties, all the possible values there in the results, and it groups them together. So I can very clearly see that I have 8 that are not connected and 2 that are connected, and by the true and the false there. So what I can do is set this to an object, and G, it's the same thing. So G0 is going to be the disconnected ones, and G1 is going to be the connected ones. So that's kind of a neat way for interactively, pulling out pieces of something. So I can do G1 group. You can see here that we have count, name, and group. Group contains the objects in question. So what I'm doing here is accessing that group property, and you can see I've got 1, 2, and these are the ones that I configured a moment ago. So let's pipe those to format list, and you can see here the virtual machine names are in the parent property. So parent is production 2, and parent there is production 3. So now that I've got the ones that I'm concerned with, how can I change them to disconnected? So there's a couple things to look at here. First, we'll check out set CD drive minus question mark. And this is the one that will let you update a CD drive. So you can use it to map to an ISO image, or you can change the start connected and connected flags. And if the no media parameter is set to true, it removes the CD drive's media backing and disconnects it. So this is the best way basically to modify that, whether your virtual machine will be able to vMotion or not, is you set that no media parameter. And it tells you right here, note that the connected parameter can be specified only if the virtual machine is powered on. So you can't change that connected parameter for VMs that are powered off. That's why we use no media. I can do this a couple different ways. I can either work with these 2 CD drives, or I can just do them for all of my virtual machines at once. So let's say get VM, pipe that to set CD. Not sure if that'll work or not. Let me try it. If you look at the input for set CD drive, you've got to give it a CD drive object as input. It won't accept a virtual machine. So my initial instinct for a moment was to just do get VM, pipe that to set CD drive. That's not going to work because this get VM commandlet, it returns virtual machine objects, not CD drive objects. So what I'm going to do is simply get CD drive and then pipe it to set CD drive, and then set the no media flag. And it's asking if I'm sure, I want to say A for all. Once that finishes, we'll be able to verify that. I'm going to go over to the vSphere client and show you. You can see it's just spinning right through all these reconfigure virtual machine, and I believe they're all done now. No, it's 60% done, 80% done, 90% done. And it's possible this may actually hang on one of my virtual machines because it has a question. So we can verify that. Sure enough, I got myself into a situation where I've got this batch virtual machine. You can see that it's got a question, which I'll show you how to answer here shortly. It's holding up the process. So I wanted to show you what this looks like and why my reconfigure virtual machine job is stuck and isn't going any further. So it's sitting there at 90%. If I had chosen to use the run async parameter on set CD drive, then what happens is that I would be simply given a series of task objects and the execution would be queued in the background. So right now, the job in PowerShell is being hung up by one of these here reconfigure virtual machine tasks. You can see that it says in progress. And that's going to sit there indefinitely until we go to batch and answer the question. You can see there that it's got the little icon that indicates that it has a question. And we'll take care of that in one of the next, in fact, I think it's the very next demonstration that I'll have for you. But let's go, I've got another window open, and let's check the status of our virtual machine CD drives. Okay, I'm going to do the group object trick again on connection state, but I can already tell by looking that none of them are going to come up. So group connection state. And you'll see momentarily, and they're all connected false. So using that no media parameter is going to get you what you need. Now, what if you wanted to perhaps create a report showing which virtual machines are connected? First, let me take a few of them and turn them back on. Let's go back to the help for set CD drive and look at the examples. And here's one where they've used the new CD drive to create one. You've got to give it an ISO path and then set CD drive no media. So that was the example that I had shown you to disconnect. They don't have an example for just connecting, so let's work that out. Set CD drive, we have connected Boolean. So what we're going to do is going to use that connected parameter. We're going to modify a few VMs. Let's get VM prod star. We're going to change those. We're going to pipe that to set CD drive and say connected true. Okay, this didn't work because, as I had shown you earlier, you've got to pipe a CD drive object to the set CD drive command line. Let's try it again. Go up like this, get CD drive. Now try it. I'm going to say A for yes to all. And if you can see in there in the background, reconfigure virtual machine jobs are spinning up. Okay, so that worked. Let's try to validate it. Okay, and pipe that to group object connection state. And it says connected false. Okay, some of those are just now completing. Let's examine these by hand. This is set to client device. This is not one of the ones that I had configured earlier. Let's look at production 2. Client device. So these were reset. This one is actually off. Okay, so what we'll have to do here is set them to an ISO. We can do that. And I've got one handy. In order to set them to an ISO image, we've got to have that ISO path. So you may recall we had the VM stores virtual. I'm going to go to basement. I'm going to go to my second vCenter data store. And there it is, ISO. Now, I'm going to pipe that to format list, and this particular ISO image, its data store full path name is the one that I need. Just going to copy that to the clipboard. Take back to C. Let's do a get VM prod star, pipe that to get CD drive, pipe that to set CD drive, and we have an ISO path parameter. And since this is a string, we do have to enclose it in quotes, especially since it has a space in it. If you don't have a space in a string, you can usually get away with leaving the quotes off. But I'm going to do that there, quote, and say connected, true. And just for the heck of it, I'm going to throw on a verbose there. I'm going to say A for yes to all. Okay, reconfigure. So one of them completed. And now this second one, now I'm not doing any validation ahead of time as I'm doing these demos. I kind of like it that way because I get to see the error messages and then explain the error messages to you. So this one, so that you'll know what it is when you see it, the operation for the entity failed with the following message, invalid configuration for device. So what's happened here is that one of the virtual machines is on host 11 and the other two are on host 12. And the data store with the ISO images that I just tried to connect is the local data store on the second ESX server. It's not a shared data store. So of course, when set CD drive went to production 1 and tried to map that ISO image, well, it's going to fail because it can't get to that second data store. So let's look at the settings for one of these and just kind of verify that it is what we expect it to be. And as you can see, it's now set to data store ISO file and it's connected. So now we have some instances of virtual machines which will definitely fail vMotion, and that's what we want to do. We want to produce a report showing that. Let's get VM, pipe that to get CD drive, and group on connection state. Okay, now we've got two. There's a few things we can do here if we want to produce a report showing which are which. And you might recall when we looked at the CD drive objects, there's a property called parent, and that has the virtual machine name. So that's what I'm going to do here, is I'm going to say, let's just select parent and connection state. Okay, so now you've got a report which clearly shows you what's what with regards to your drives and whether they're connected or not. And you can then take this and create a HTML report, file.html. What that did was actually create the HTML. It didn't actually write it to a file. So let's see. Okay, convert to HTML. Now here's the information you can see coming up as an HTML file. So we can actually pipe that to set content. Now once that finishes, let's do a dir file.html. You can see it there. And there is my report. Connected true, connect false, virtual machine names. So there we go. That is our demonstration for working with CD drives. Okay, we're up to our last demonstration in the Modify Virtual Machines section. Now we're going to talk about the VM question commandlets. There are a few of them. First we have get VM question. This is how you display information about open questions. You can filter by question, text, or ID. I'll show you a screenshot of what questions I'm talking about here in a moment. Set VM question. This is to answer or confirm an open question. And then you have answer VM question, which is simply an alias to set VM question. VMware included this as a built-in alias when you install the PowerCLI snap-in. So it's just for convenience. It does exactly the same thing as the set VM question commandlet. Let me bring up my console. Okay, before I show you the Power CLI portion, this is what the question that I've got set up in my lab here. You can see the batch virtual machine has a little yellow icon next to it, and right here at the top we've got a yellow window, and it says message UUID altered. The VM may have been moved or copied. So in this case, I moved the VMDK files from one data store to another, and I didn't use vCenter. There's plenty of cases where you're going to want to do something similar. For example, you could use data movers behind the scene at the SAN level, where you're going to move this information around, or maybe you're going to remap some LUNs. You're going to take some LUNs and unpresent them from one ESX server and then present them to another ESX server. That way you don't have to copy data around. However, what happens once you've done a move like that when you don't use vCenter is the UUID can change, because that UUID is the path is a component of the location of where that data store is. So it's prompting you that did you move it or did you copy it? And if you moved it, then the proper answer is I moved it, and you hit OK, and then you can continue using this virtual machine. Now in this case, I actually did this a day or two ago, and I've got several things which are queued up which haven't happened because this virtual machine has an open question. So it's you can imagine if you've got multiples of these that have gotten queued up, it's tedious to go through and look for them and answer them all. And if this was part of some maintenance operation where you expected this to happen anyway, you're going to want to have as a part of your process, okay, I've moved all the LUNs and now I need to go answer all the questions, for example. So let me show you how we can work with some of these. First, I'll show you I've got two windows open with these indefinite modified jobs that are just going to sit there until I answer these questions. So first, let's do a get command on VM question. And you can see there's the three. I'm going to just type get VM question by itself, hit enter, and you're going to get an entry that looks similar to this for every question that is outstanding in your virtual center. You can see here we've got three different properties: text, options, and default. And it's actually showing you exactly the same information that we see in the vSphere console. So down to the identifier of the question, including the actual explanatory text. And then we've got the different options and what is the default option. Our goal here is to answer the question. So before I do that, I'm going to say Q equals question. So what I want to do is pipe this to format list, see if there's anything else. So we do have a question ID of 1, and the virtual machine ID and the virtual machine name. And in addition, you can see the other information which was already there. Let's look at the parameters for get VM question. So it has virtual machine, question text, question ID. So for example, I could do get VMQ VM batch. It's going to show the same information. If I say get VM app, it's not going to show anything at all. So you can see it filtered that out. Let's say, for example, I want to do get VM question, question text. Okay, and I believe that I have to put an asterisk here. I'm going to try it without it, see what happens. Okay, let's put an asterisk. Okay, so if I wanted to look for all questions which match this type of question, that's how I would do that, is say question text, and then since it is doing a wildcard match, I put the asterisk at the end, and that will produce that result. So I have this question and I need to answer it. Let's look at the set VM question command line. So you can just tell it to answer the default, or you can provide it with the option, and it will figure it out by what you specify there is the option. And then you do have to pass it a question on for the VM question parameter here, but you can do it on the pipeline. So if I wanted to answer the default, here's how I would do that. I would get VM question, pipe that to set VM question default. If I hit enter, it's going to go ahead and do that. But let's look and see what the default is. It's I copied it. In this case, I didn't. I moved it. So I definitely want to be sure that the correct answer is going to be specified. So let's look at the question text. Okay, so our options are, and here's the the option ID, label, and summary. I moved it or I copied it. So right off the bat, I'm not getting a great hint from the help for the set VM question as to what it's looking for. It just says object. That could be anything. Literally, it could be an integer, it could be text. It's not giving me any sort of clue here. So I'm going to go look at the help for this and open that up full. If the default option parameter is set to true, we did figure that out. Let's page down a little bit, look at option. Specify an object or string to provide the answer. It does support wildcards for string values, and the string can be used to specify an option ID or label. So it looks like I should be able to put down anything in there. So I'm going to scroll up a little bit and show you. The help clearly says option ID or label. So I should be able to answer either a number, for example 1, or a label, I moved it. And note that it's I space underscore moved space it. Continue on through the help, see if there's any other surprises that I need to know about. Default option, we know what that one is. And here's an example where it's selecting the default option. And here's another one where it says cancel. In my case, VM question, pipette2, set VM question, and I want to show you what if. So what if is a built-in parameter. It's supported by most, if not all, PowerShell commandlets. And basically what it's going to do is to show you what would have happened. And it's basically explaining here, okay, if you had not supplied the what if parameter, then it would go ahead and do this here. So it's useful to do that sometimes to check your syntax. So I'm going to not do that though. So let's try option, and I'm going to scroll up to where I had my options way up here. Okay, so I want to do I moved it. And it said that it accepts wildcards. So I'm just going to say moved and see what that does. Actually, I'm going to do it without an asterisk, and I want to see what it does. Let's just see. Okay, so I got the error message, and it's pretty clear what the error message means. Let's try with asterisks and see what that does. And it looks like it's about to do it. I'm going to hit enter to say yes. And I'm going to type get VM question again. And there's no result. So let's go back to vSphere client. Looks like the question's gone. And now you can see these. Yeah, I've got things that are starting to trickle through. Answer virtual machine question task is now set to completed. Looks like it's waiting on a power on job. So these are going to start trickling through here in the next minute or so. And I should see some of my, yep, in fact, here we go. This reconfigure job just went through. There's my CD drive job from earlier that just went through. And well, one of these fails, but that's okay. And that's how you answer questions using PowerCLI. Now we're going to work with templates. Templates in vCenter are how you can take a commonly used virtual machine and take the data inside of it, the settings around it, such as the memory, the disk size, network cards, and so forth, bundle that up, and then deploy it out over and over again. And it's a great feature, a big time saver. There are commandlets, of course, for working with templates, one of which is the new template commandlet. Starting with get template, of course. This one is used to retrieve information about templates in vCenter. We have move templates. This will allow you to move a template from one location to another. You can use new template to clone a virtual machine to a new template. Remove template will let you remove a template from vCenter and optionally delete the disk files permanently, so you're not leaving any clutter behind. And lastly, set template. You can use this to rename a template or convert a template to a virtual machine. Now note that if you want to convert a virtual machine to a template, you're not going to use one of these. You're going to use the set VM commandlet. So if you want to go from VM to template, you use set VM. If you want to go from template to VM, you'll use set template. It's all about what object are we modifying. So let's do some examples. I'm going to give you a demonstration of how to deploy multiple virtual machines from a single template. Okay, I've got my console up. Let's check out the commands we are going to be working with. Get, move, new, remove, and set. Start out with get template. You can see I've got one there. If I go to the vCenter console, you can see here is that template. So let's take this thing and make many copies of it. First of all, I want to show you how easy it is to convert a template to a VM and vice versa. Let's do get template, pipe that to set template, and I'm just going to hit, there we go, 2VM is the name of it. And I hit enter and it's done. It's that quick. So let's get VM base template, set VM, and to template. Oops, let me put an asterisk there. There we go. You can see set VM going. And if I go to the vSphere client, you can see we started as template, mark it as a virtual machine, and then mark VM as a template. Okay, so back to get template. We want to deploy a virtual machine using this template. And first, actually, let's look at set template. Okay, we can change the name of a template, and we can convert to a VM, which we did just now. That's basically all there is to it for that. If I want to use a template as a source for virtual machine cloning, an ideal way to do that is to just start off with get template and then pipe that to new VM. Now, if I want to do this for multiple virtual machines, I'm going to have something unique, which of course is going to be my VM name. There's a dozen different ways we could do this in PowerShell. I'm going to show you one. Now this, which I think is going to be pretty common use case, you're going to have virtual machines which are named similarly, the only difference being that they have a different number at the end. So, let's say that I need to create new virtual machines and they're all going to be called inf ATL, I don't know, M for male, and then they're going to start at 05 and they're going to go to 09. Something like that. Okay, so let's do inf ATL M, and I want to create 4 virtual machines. They're going to be labeled 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Here's how I can do that using PowerShell. I'm going to start with 5.9. Hit enter. So that is the range operator. The 2 dots in a row are called a range operator. What I can do here is pipe this to the for each object commandlet, and everything that's in the curly braces here, the script block, it's going to do the exact same thing. But now I've got the ability to do stuff. So let's do inf ATL M0, and then like that. There's my virtual machine names. Okay. Let's grab our template first. So get template base template. We'll call that T. There's my T. Let's go to our handy dandy for each object loop, and we'll say T, pipe that to new VM and name. And let's see, I lost my handy dandy inf ATL M0 $_ very important part of the piece. And I'm just going to say what if. Now in PowerShell, you don't have to type all of a parameter name. I'm just going to say -what, and it'll figure it out. And this is what I wanted to do, was to kind of build it step by step. So now I can hit the up arrow and I know I'll be able to instantly have access to that again. but I need to add something. I need to provide for the VM host. So let's do that. VM host 192.168.1.11 in my case. So I've got what appears to be correct syntax. Let's take off the what if, like so. And there it goes. You can see it says clone virtual machine up here at the top very clearly. And I'm going to go to my vSphere client, see how that's going. And I've got 1, 2. So it's definitely spinning right along. And sure enough, here's my inf ATL M05 and my 06. And we'll have 07, 8, and 9 here very shortly. So that is an excellent way to create multiple similarly configured or identically configured virtual machines using templates with PowerCLI. Okay, now we're going to work with snapshots. You guys know what snapshots are, right? This is a point-in-time picture of a virtual machine, which you can revert back to later, and you can browse these in the vCenter client. Well, of course, no surprise, you can create them and manage them using PowerCLI, so that's what I'm going to show you how to do. We have a few commandlets to work with here. First one I'm going to talk about is get snapshot. This is used to retrieve information about a snapshot. New snapshot is used to create them. Remove is to get rid of them. And set is used to change the name and description of a snapshot. Not mentioned here, but we did mention it previously, set VM, that's what you're going to use to revert to a previous snapshot. Because in that case, you're modifying the virtual machine, you're not modifying the snapshot. So let's go straight into the demonstration. I'm going to show you how to work with these commandlets. Okay, I have my console open. Let's see, GCM star snapshot. And there they are. Let's run get snapshot. Okay, no mandatory parameter VM. So let's do get VM, pipe that to get snapshot. And I've got one, and the description is smile for the new screenshot. So let's see what this virtual machine is. We'll say snap equals, and then I'm going to take that new snap variable and pipe that to format list. That will allow me to show some more information. And we have, okay, VM property is apo2. So that's how I know which virtual machine this snapshot is applicable to. You can see here the size of the snapshot, whether it's current, is replay supported, and a few other pieces of information. Here's the power state of the virtual machine when the snapshot was taken, and of course the created. This is a time and date. What if I wanted to take a snapshot of a bunch of virtual machines at once? That's really easy to do. So let's do get VM prod. That's what I'm going to use as sources for these snapshots. First, let's look at the help for new snapshot. Here's the set of parameters. We have memory is a Boolean. That's whether or not I want to have the snapshot include the state of the virtual machine memory. Quiesce, this is used to, in fact, I'll show you here in the vSphere client. If you have the virtual machine is powered on and it's got the VM tools running, then you can use the quiesce option. You can see here it says quiesce guest file system. And this will basically pause disk writes for the duration of the snapshot. And let's go back to our screen. Virtual machine, so you have to supply obviously a virtual machine to tell it which you're going to create the snapshot of. And then we have name and description. So these are this commandlet's pretty easy to use. Let's do get VM prod star, pipe that to new snapshot, today's snapshot name, and let's say description. Okay, and away we go. And There we go. It was that quick. So it's really easy to work with snapshots in that way. What if I want to get rid of them? Let's do that. Let's do a get VM prod get snapshot and pipe that to remove snapshot. And it'll probably, it'll ask me if I'm sure. I'm going to say A for yes to all. And that will progress momentarily. We can check in the vSphere client to see what's going on. And it's done now. But you can see create right here and then remove. Okay, so all that remains now is my next demonstration, revert to a previous snapshot. So let's see here. We have the app02 get snap. And if I wanted to revert to this, I'm going to actually, let's say snap equals. So that's snapshot I'm going to work with. Let's look back at the set VM commandlet. Here we go, snapshot set. So if you provide a snapshot object to the set VM commandlet, it's going to go ahead and revert that virtual machine. So let's do this. I'm not even certain if it needs the virtual machine parameter applied or not. Well, one way to find out, does need the virtual machine. So let's say app02. Are you certain? And note that it does say reverting VM app02 to snapshot new snapshot. I'm going to say enter for yes. And you can see revert snapshot is progressing. Go to the vSphere client. And you see the exact same thing. So it's pretty easy to do. Now I will note that a revert operation can take much longer than the initial creation of a snapshot. Creating a snapshot on VMFS is a pretty efficient operation. It just takes a couple seconds. Reverting depends on the size of the snapshot. So if you've got a very active virtual machine and you have a snapshot that you've left on there for days or months or who knows how long it's been sitting there, then when you revert it, it could literally take hours. I've heard of them taking more than a day. Just depends on what you're doing, but basically it's got to take this Delta file and then commit all those changes to the virtual machine disk image, and it's just a very disk intensive process. And another tip I'll give you is don't do a lot of reverts at the same time. You could impact the disk IOPS available to your ESX server because, as I said, it's a very disk intensive operation. So you're going to want to be careful with those. Maybe do them at off-peak times. Okay, we're going from snapshots to vMotion. vMotion, of course, is a key feature in your VMware circles. This is the ability to move a virtual machine from one server to another without disrupting its workload. So you can take your virtual machine and migrate things from one server off of one server and then patch that server or perform maintenance on it. And you can do this without impacting your production environment. Of course, there's a way to do that from PowerShell. There's a commandlet called movevm. It's a sort of an unassuming name, and it performs multiple purposes. This commandlet can move a virtual machine to a new folder, move a VM to a new resource pool, move a VM to a new host, or move a VM to a new data store. Now, of these, only the third and the fourth options here involve vMotion. Moving a VM to a new folder, there's nothing complicated about that. That's just a logical change in the vCenter database. Moving a VM to a new resource pool is somewhat more intrusive, but we're still talking about an online change. It's not a big deal. When you move a VM to a new host or to a new data store, that's where vMotion kicks in. A couple of important parameters are destination and data store. So this is how you're going to provide, whether we're talking about a new resource pool, a new VM host, or just a folder. You're going to specify that using the destination parameter. And then data store. If you're doing svMotion, storage vMotion, then you're going to specify a new data store using the data store parameter. And if the virtual machine is off, then you're not going to be using vMotion. That's just going to use the standard API. When it's on, you'll use vMotion. Now let's go into a demonstration. So we have our console up. Got a virtual machine here that I want to move. I'm going to pipe it to format list, alias FL. Okay, so you can see the name's app, and it is sitting on host 192.168.1.12. Let's do get VM app, pipe that to get data store, and we'll see that it is on the local DS 10.00.31 data store. So let's move this. First, I'm going to create a couple of variables. So VM equals get VM app, and then host equals get VM host 192.168.1.11. And we're going to do this in a couple steps, but I'm going to go ahead and make a variable for my data store move. DS equals get data store open filer. Okay, now I'm going to do VM, pipe that to move VM, and we'll say destination is H. Hit enter, and we should see that queue up here in a moment. And go to the vSphere client, and you'll see relocate virtual machine in progress. We're doing a relocate rather than a migrate or a vMotion, just because that's what I have set up here to perform a quick demonstration, but the way that you do it is exactly the same. So now I should have, there's my new virtual machine, VM, pipe that to, actually we'll do a get VM again, and pipe that to format list. See, it's now on 11. Let's move its data store. Data store, and we'll say DS. Chugging right along. Now let's do VM, pipe that to get data store. We moved a VM from one host to another, and then from one data store to another using that same commandlet. Now, let's do another thing. Let's say VM, pipe that to get folder. So in this case, it doesn't work that way. So what we're going to do is GPM get folder. Okay. What my goal here is, let me show you from the vSphere client. Change my view to VMs and templates. Okay, so I have the app VM, and it's not in a folder right now, and I want to move it to a new folder. This is another use case for the same get move VM commandlet. Clear my screen here, and we'll say get folder. Got several of them, and test folder will work. So let's say $F equals get folder test folder. Now $F contains that. So let's say VM, that's app. We're going to pipe that to move VM destination F, move entity, and note that it uses a different, it's not relocating a virtual machine, it's moving an entity. And now you can see clearly the app VM is now in the test folder. So that's all I want to show you for the move VM commandlet. Okay, now we're going to talk about how to execute PowerCLI scripts in virtual machines. We're going to be using the invoke VM script commandlet, and what this does, it lets you execute scripts inside of virtual machines in such a way that you're actually outside of the hypervisor context here. We're not managing the virtual machines, we're not managing the VM hosts. We're talking about automating things within the virtual machines. So there is a commandlet for it called invoke VM script, and on a Windows VM, it'll let you execute a PowerShell or a batch script. And on a Linux virtual machine, you can execute a bash script. Note that the virtual machine must be powered on and the VMware Tools services must be running, because that's actually your entry point here. It's going to be the Tools service which will be performing the execution operation. Also note that you've got to know the guest OS credentials for the virtual machine in question. So if you're going to be running commands against multiple virtual machines, you'll need to make sure that you know the guest credentials of them and supply them accordingly. There's several important parameters that we'll be talking about. The first one is script text, and this is going to actually contain the text of the script that you want to run, and it also has a facility to have a path to a script file, which will then be executed remotely on the virtual machine. Second parameter here is script type, and this is going to be either PowerShell or BAT for a Windows virtual machine if you wanted to execute scripts on those. And then guest credential, this is how you supply the username and password to invoke VM script so that it can perform this remote execution. Note also that the way that these scripts are executed, it's done through VMware's VIX API. And right now, as of this recording, with version 4.11 of PowerCLI, the version of the VIX API is 32-bit, and you can only call it from a 32-bit PowerShell console. So let me show you what I mean by that. If we go type in PowerShell, you can see that I've got two windows. The one without any bitness here is 64-bit, and the one specified as x86, so obviously it's going to be a 32-bit. And if I type PowerCLI, same thing. I've got a 32-bit and a 64-bit. So I've already got a 32-bit window open. Let's go to that. And in fact, here is the help file for invoke VM script. And you can see here where it's talking about the script text parameter. And this parameter is required. And as I said, you can see here it says you can also pass to this parameter a string variable containing the path to a script. You also need to specify the virtual machine, and there are a couple of parameters here for specifying host credentials. And you don't actually need to do this if you're running a recent version of ESX, and you can see here where it explains that basically what's happening is VIX will obtain the host credentials that it needs as long as you're running 4.0 or later. So I'm not even going to show you an example of the host credential stuff. So let's page down one. Here we have guest credential, which accepts a PS credential object. And I've shown you some examples of that, and I'll do so again here in a moment. But this is greatly preferred over passing a username and a password, like this guest password here, in the clear, as it were. Although it is a good thing here that the guest password is will work with a secure string, which is a PowerShell feature. And here we have at the bottom the script type. You can see here the valid values are PowerShell, BAT, and Bash. By default, the execution type is going to be PowerShell. So you don't need to specify this unless you need to run a batch script on a Windows virtual machine. So that's all I wanted to show you there. Let's see if we can make this work. So I'm connecting to a different vCenter right now, actually an ESX server, and I'm going to say $VM equals get_VM vCenter. And you guessed it, this is actually the VM which is running my virtual center instance right now. And I'm going to make another, we'll call it GC. We'll say GC equals get credentials. And we'll spell it correctly. Okay, now my guest credentials are stored within that variable. Let's see what we can do with it. Okay, first of all, let's see, invoke VM script, and we'll say VM $VM guest credential is going to be GC, and then script text is going to be, I'm just going to say GSV_VPXD, because I like to save typing. So let's hit enter on this and see what it does. You can see now I've got a progress window at the top. It shows that the action is in progress. And there we go. So now you can see GSV is an alias to get service. And VPXD, in this case, obviously we can see by the return result here that this is my virtual center server. So that was a quick example of doing that in PowerShell. Now you can actually get a little more complex with PowerShell. Instead of a single line contained within quotes like that, you can use a script block, which is anything contained within curly braces. I was doing some testing with this earlier. So let's replace the quotes there with an open curly brace. I'm going to hit enter, and you can see that I've got a couple of angle brackets here. That's PowerShell's line continuation denotion there. So I'm just going to type a couple of things. It's a Win32 computer system, and I'm going to do another one. Let's do that get service again, and we'll do another get WMI object. Oh, that'll spit out a whole lot of stuff. Anyway, let's say close brace, hit enter, and then enter one more time to exit the line continuation mode. And now we have this script is going to go ahead and run. And sure enough, you can see hundreds and hundreds of lines of text as my processes are spit out on the screen. So obviously you're going to have to think about what it is you're doing. If you want to return text back, you're going to want to capture that text. I could easily have done right here where the invoke VM script starts. I could just say output equals. And in fact, let's do that again right now. And let's see, scrolling up in here, we'll just do this get WMI object and then close that off. Hit enter and let this one continue. And I'll show you what is in the output variable. A lot of stuff is the answer to that question. So, pretty neat ability to work with remote systems, and you can execute stuff too. All I did was read a couple of things in this case, but there's the possibilities are pretty limitless on this case. So you can run programs, start a scheduled job. There's a lot of things that you could do with this, and of course it's not limited to just Windows. You can also work with your Linux virtual machines as well. We've gone through a lot talking about virtual machines in this lesson. First up, we talked about an overview of the available virtual machine commandlets, and I explained to you that not all of them have VM in the title. There were several exceptions to that, such as get hard disk, get network adapter. Then, of course, we have the most important commandlet, that is get-vm. I use this one a whole lot. Then I showed you how to create virtual machines using several different techniques, along with the new-vm commandlet. And we talked about how to manage virtual machine power states using commandlets such as start VM and stop VM and restart VM. And don't forget shutdown VM guest. That'll let you do that gracefully and without pulling the plug. We talked about modifying virtual machines. Had several demonstrations in this section. You'll recall set VM as well as the get hard disk, set hard disk, get network adapter, set network adapter examples that we went through. Then we talked about working with templates, and you saw how easy it is to create multiple virtual machines using a series of numbers and cloning from a template. Then we worked with snapshots. Those are pretty easy to work with. And I showed you how to use the move VM commandlet to perform vMotion or svMotion. And lastly, execute PowerCLI scripts in virtual machines.